Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. I'm glad you could join us today. I'm Marin, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure that your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide a smooth webinar. During the webinar, if you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our upcoming webinars are on the 26th, that's Thursday at 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We'll be hearing from James Tanner, who's giving an updated look on myheritage.com. The following week, we will be hearing from Catherine Grant. She'll be giving us another update on the person page on Family Search. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links of the recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we're pleased to hear from Dr. Plew, who will be giving a presentation on resurrecting your LDS ancestors with Mormon places. Dr. Plew is an associate professor of geography at Brigham Young University. He received his bachelor's degree in cartography and mathematics from BYU in 1992, and his master's and PhD degrees in geography from the State University of New York in Buffalo. His career has focused on historical geographical information systems and historical cartographer, with an emphasis on representing the spatial history of the Mormonism movement, including his award-winning Mapping Mormonism, an Atlas of Latter-day Saint History. He and his wife, Jamie, have 5 children. And if Dr. Plew is ready, we'll turn the time over to him.
All right, thank you, Marin. Are we ready to go? Thank you for joining us, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing here and how that can help you in your research of your family history. In the past, it seems like as we've worked on family history, we've often been focused so much on trying to do temple work that when we look at our ancestors who are already members of the church, we get this attitude of thinking, oh, they're done. I don't need to worry about them. I don't need to know anything about them because their work is done. They're all set. And yet that gives us, especially those of us who may have several generations in the church, these photographs are of some of my ancestors who joined the church and were converts. We miss a lot of their life. We don't know a lot about them because we kind of haven't thought much about them if we're focused on ordinances. As we think about these ancestors, think about, for those of you who are members of the church, how much of your life the church plays a role in, and church-related events are an important part of your life. So here are some of the things that would be of interest to us, or things that we or our ancestors participate in that are an important part of a life in the church. Everything from when you're born and the blessing that you receive as a child, all the way till priest ordinations and the baptisms. You know, we have records in Family Search already about someone being baptized, but do you know who it was, or where it happened, or were the circumstances of their conversion? So all of these things might be of interest to us in knowing something about and knowing more about the lives of our ancestors who were members of the church. Now, there's a lot of resources already out there. Family Search in particular, and as well as the Church History Library, have put a great deal of effort in recent years to telling more of the story of people who were members of the church. So, for example, at the Church History Library, we have this massive early missionaries database of thousands and thousands of missionaries that were called in the first 100 years of the church. And for years, they've had the overland travel database. Fortunately, both of these now, there are connections between the databases in the Church History Library and Family Search. The Church History Library also has the Patriarchal Blessings system, where you can request the patriarchal blessings of your ancestors. I've actually learned a great deal about my ancestors and the gifts that they had through reading their patriarchal blessings. At the Family History Library, there are a number of records as well that we can receive, that we can look at, including the actual temple records. There are things that you can learn from those temple records, looking at the original temple records, that you don't get from just the ordinance data that is in Family Search, in the public-facing version of Family Search. And so there's a number of different kinds of things that we can get from those records. I want to focus a little bit today on local church records. So the records that were kept in each ward or branch or stake. Those records are extremely important. In fact, before 1941, the only records that existed of your membership were held and recorded by the clerk in each ward or branch. Centralized records where the church had a database of all members of the church did not exist until the 1940s. So originally, your membership records were that the clerk in your ward or branch had a ledger that they kept all of your important ordinance information, your birth, when you moved into the ward, when you move out of the ward, they would give you a certificate that would say this person is in good standing with the church. They hold this priesthood office, and you would give that to the clerk when you moved into a new ward or branch, and they would record it into their ledger book. So those ledgers, which we often refer to as the record of members, were very important. And in 1877, President Brigham Young issued a circular, and one of the things that said was that all wards and branches needed to be keeping those records. Before that, it's kind of hit or miss what has survived. After that, it's pretty consistent that those records exist. We also have other records of different organizations within each local church. There might be Relief Society meeting minutes. There might be priesthood quorum minutes. There might be minutes of leadership of the branch or ward. In fact, we even have in a lot of wards minutes of sacrament meetings. It'd be a very interesting thing to see what your ancestor gave a talk on in church. And then we also have histories that have been written, later histories, secondary books and such that have been written about wards and branches and stakes. So here's some examples. Here's one of these ledgers. This is one showing some of my ancestors in New Zealand that joined the church in this branch. And this gives information about their birth, about their parents, important kind of vital information for family history, but also when they were baptized, where they were baptized, and by whom, who confirmed them. Oftentimes those would have been the missionaries, and it's a great thing to know who the missionaries were that taught your ancestor. And then that last column you can see shows what happened. So it shows some of them were emigrating to Zion, emigrating to Utah. Some of them were moving to another branch, and so then I can track them on the records for that branch. So these records are very useful. Here's some examples of these ward and stake histories. These often give very useful information about who leaders were, as well as the members of quorums and pictures and such of those people. Here's an example of one of these ward minutes. So this is actually the early part of the Provo stake as it was originally organized. And this has a lot of information about leaders being called and ordained. It has information about early meetings that were held, has information about quorums and people being ordained in priesthood quorums. So this has a lot of useful information for about a number of people. This one page here probably mentions 30 different people that are the ancestors of somebody out there. All of this leads to the question, in order to use these kinds of records, is you got to know, well, where I kind of have an idea of where my ancestor lived, but what ward were they in? I don't even know what wards existed at that time, or branches or stakes. So where do I need to look for those records? And that leads to our site, Mormon Places. So this site was developed over the past few years. It was an outgrowth of our atlas, Mapping Mormonism. As part of that atlas, we collected a huge amount of data on early wards and branches. And so we kind of had that data all sitting around and thought, how can we make this data more useful? So after that time, we've continued to collect information. We started off knowing about, say, about 1,500 wards or branches, and now we're up over 7,000. We focused on the period before 1930, so the first 100 years of the church. There's several reasons for that, having to do with sources, but one of the reasons is that after 1930, the number of wards and branches really starts to grow very rapidly, and it just was a bigger job. So we focused on that time period. And we've done that worldwide, so that's all across the world. And for each of those, we've tried to document as best we can. It's still a work in progress, but we've tried to document as best we can basic historical data about when each ward and branch was created or eliminated, where those were, including in dense areas such as along the Wasatch Front. We've been collecting data on boundaries of those wards and how those boundaries changed over time. A lot of links to source materials like the ones I showed before, especially in the Family History Library, the Church History Library, and here in the BYU Library. And then we're even adding things about, we're even layers of historical base maps so that you can see what the lay of the land looked like at the time that we're looking at. It also includes other things besides congregations, things like settlements and cemeteries and buildings. So I'll show you a bit about what the website looks like here in a sec. But let me kind of walk through how this might work. So the first thing you need to know is where did your ancestor live? So that could be just knowing the town they were in, or could be knowing the address, at least after 1900, or from 1900 on, in significant cities, so places like Salt Lake City. Census records actually gave the address, the street address of those people. So if I can find that, that'll help me to find out what ward they were in. And then we can use Mormon Places to try to find where they were. So here is the Mormon Places website. It's just mormonplaces.byu.edu. Yes, I know that I should be changing the name of that, and I'm working on that, but this is what it is for now. So from this website, I can either look at places from a map, or I can look at them actually as a list of places if I kind of have a good idea of which places I'm looking for, which wards or branches I'm looking for. That might be a little faster, but I'm going to go through the map here. So this is the map showing these 7,000 plus places that we have. I'm going to focus here. You can see how we've got a lot of different kinds of places here shown by different colors. I'm going to turn off everything here except for congregations. We're working on adding some of these other things, but for now, most of our efforts has been on congregations. You'll notice that we actually have included some branches from other and events and such from other offshoots of the church. I'm going to turn those off as well for now. And then all of this is because we have the start and end dates for these, at least we've been trying to collect the start and end dates of these. For a lot of these, we have now, you can use this time slider here to say, well, what did it look like at the time? So I've gone to about 1890 here. So now I can see what was in existence in the 1890s. The ones that you can kind of see, some of these that are light blue, those are ones we're not sure whether they existed or not. The ones that are dark blue are ones that we are sure existed. And I'm going to zoom in here on Britain. And I'm going to track one of my ancestors. So I'm going to go back a little bit to the 1850s. This was a time actually when the church was extremely strong in Britain. In the early 1850s, there were more members in Britain than there were in Utah. So my ancestor lived up in this area here of London. I've found that, did that by looking at census records from the 1850s that in England gave their address. And so I've tracked down exactly where they are. And so if I look at 1854, it says that I see a couple of branches here that may have been in existence. So I can go look at that branch. I'm going to look at the Goswell Road branch here. So it will bring up some information here. Let me just turn on here, by the way, this historic map. So what we've done is these historic maps, we've done one of, we have a source for all of England, a source for all of Denmark, and then I've built one with some students for Utah in 1930. So this is kind of late 1800s England, which is very helpful for finding exactly where my ancestor would have lived. If I can find a street on the census, I can track down exactly where they lived. I can't remember the exact location here, but they were somewhere in this area. So here's the Goswell Road branch, and it has some basic information here that shows that it most likely existed around this time. And now I'm going to pull that up here to get some more detailed information about it. So this information has this similar to what I saw before, generally where it's located, when did it start, when did it end. It says that it was a branch, said it was part of the London Conference. If you're not aware, in the church prior to 1927, what we commonly call districts, that is kind of a slightly less than a stake in an area that just has branches. Prior to 1927, those were called conferences. So this is part of that, and I may find more records in that conference than I'm finding in this branch. So this gives me a couple sources for where I might find more information about that. So for example, it says that I've got some source information here. I'm going to go look at that for a second. We've got a note. As we were doing research, we have a note here that says that it may have actually been the same branch as Finsbury. That's something that we're still researching. So I'll go to this record of members link here. So this links us over to Family Search. These record of members films are located in Family Search. We don't have them at all libraries. BYU actually has a almost complete set of these record of members films, and they are also held at the Family History Library. The Church History Library is working on right now on releasing those digitally, so you'll be able to view them online. That's not available right now, but they're working on that. So this is actually several branches. This film includes several branches that are part of the British mission. But here we can see, here's the Goswell Road branch and the Finsbury branch. So right now, those are not online. They're only available on film, as you can tell from the little film icon over here on the right-hand side. But if I can get a hold of those, and it looks like these films are held by several libraries, fortunately, I can then go look at those films and get some more information. And in this, for example, I was able to find my ancestor and find some really interesting things about them, including, for example, which member of the church it was that originally joined the church and spread the gospel to the other family members. And it turned out that the one that originally joined the church eventually moved away and never came to America. We don't know if they eventually left the church or whatever, but what we have in Family Search, we didn't have that full story of that particular family member because their ordinances had been lost, and so we didn't have that story. We can get that from the record of members films. Also on the record of members films, was able to find out that my ancestor was the branch president for a while of that branch. Actually, I think it was the Finsbury branch later on that my ancestor was the branch president of. So all of those are things I was able to learn by looking at these family history records. Also, this link here shows that the other link, it shows that it was part of that it's mentioned in the mission manuscript history for the British mission. That gives some basic historical information, but that seems to be all we have for this one. Let's go look at another one. Let's go to somewhere closer to home here. I'm actually going to search here for Provo. So let's go to the Provo 4th Ward. There it is. So in places like the Wasatch Front, when I click on a place, oops. So now I'm now going to say my ancestor lived here much later, say in the 1890s. Now let's say about 1907. So you can see that now we have more wards, and so that's actually changing as I look at this. So here's the Provo 4th Ward. If I click on this, we actually have the boundaries encoded for this ward. So as I click on it, it's actually pulled up. These were the boundaries that we knew about in 1907. So this is very helpful if I want to, I'm going to turn the historical map back on. Okay, so here's Provo as it looked in 1930. Quite a bit different than it looks now, quite a bit smaller than it looks. So if I've been able to find the actual address for my ancestor, I can use these ward boundaries to determine whether my ancestor lived in the Provo 4th Ward or the Provo 5th Ward. Those boundaries have changed quite a bit over the years. And so knowing those boundaries is very helpful. So if I determine that my ancestor lived in the Provo 4th Ward in 1907, pull that back up again, go to the detailed view here. So now I have a number of things. I have better information about this ward like this. So I have the actual exact date that it was organized and a source for that. We've got actually the membership for several different years that I can see how it has grown over the years. I can link to other places. So for example, I can link to the Provo or Utah stake. Its name changed a few times to get more information about stake records. I can actually see that it was, I can see that the ward was actually divided at some point, and here's another ward that was created from it. So if my ancestor lived in that other ward, and I say, well, I knew that they lived in Pleasant View, but what was it before Pleasant View? Now I know that that ward was divided from the 4th Ward. And in fact, we also have records here. I'll open this one up. We've been going through and collecting data on a lot of churches that are still around that date from this period. So here's the 4th Ward building from the early 1900s. It's now an apartment building, but if I'm interested in, hey, my ancestor actually met in that building, that can be an interesting thing to be able to go visit. So those are all buildings that are still around, but may or may not be part of the church at this time. Information about the boundaries. And then here we have, you can see that we have a lot more information about sources. So here I have very specific sources about different things that are happening in those units. I also have, here's the record of members' films. In fact, there's several films here that are useful for different time periods. And then this one, the CHL-LR groups, you'll see on a lot of different ones. This is basically a link to generally what records the church history library has for that ward. Unfortunately, fortunately, I guess, the church history library recently rebuilt their catalog. It's a much better catalog now. Unfortunately, it's harder to link to it. So this link doesn't work, and I'm currently working with them to figure out how to do that again. So I'm actually going to have to manually make this link. So I've got that this record, the 4th Ward, Provo 4th Ward, its catalog number is LR 7224. So I'm going to go have to link to that manually. Can never remember the new history website. There it is. And actually, I want to do catalog here. There we go. Don't want to do a survey. So that was LR 7224. So this is showing a variety of different records of primary records that have been kept for the Provo Fourth Ward. Some of these may be digitized. It looks like none of these are, but I've got records from Sunday school, which is actually different Sunday school meetings. I've got financial records. I've got a variety of different minutes. I've got general histories. I've got Aaronic priesthood meetings, Relief Society meetings. So these are invaluable for seeing kind of the everyday thing. So for example, this Relief Society minutes may have records of, in a meeting, they ask for volunteers to go help a member in need, and that they will probably list who the volunteers were. And that'd just be a great thing to be able to see in an everyday sort of way. This is how my ancestor participated in this ward, and the kinds of things they did, the leadership roles they held, and how they played a role in moving this ward forward. So all of those things are things that I can see. Several of these local records, they're working on digitizing them, early ones. So for example, if your ancestor was in the Nauvoo area or in Missouri or in Winter Quarters area, a lot of those records have been digitized and are available online. Once the number of wards and branches and stakes really starts to proliferate, they haven't digitized a lot of those yet, so those are only viewable in the Church History Library. Or you can make a request to have them digitized, or you can make a request from a historian there to look up something if there's a very specific kind of information you're looking for from one of these records. So this is really an invaluable source for getting a feel for what your ancestor may have done. Let's switch back. So what can I do with that? Well, once I find those sources and look at those sources, unfortunately, in Family Search right now, there's not a really good way of connecting those to your ancestor. So let me show you kind of what I've done. So I'm going to go back to one of my ancestors. A little slow here. So this is the one that would join the church in that neighborhood of London. And so what I have done here, trying to find here what it looks like I don't have it's not there. So let me go to another one. Here we go. So I have put in here a custom event. You can see right here that says that they were a member of this Finsbury Goswell Road branch. And given the details of that, some of the information that I was able to pull for this person from from that record of members films. And I've also added, unfortunately, that's the only way to do it, is to add these as custom events. Some people will use this religious affiliation to record their membership in an LDS church, LDS congregation. So this shows, so I'm actually showing here that they actually were in several different branches. They moved from one branch to another as the branches divided or as boundaries were changed. Their records were moved. I don't think they moved very much, but the branch boundaries changed. So they were moved from one to another. So that's probably right now the best way of showing that kind of information, whether that is their maybe priesthood ordinations or more information about their baptism. If you want to show who actually baptized them and information like that, is probably to go in this section of other information and record that kind of information. So, and you can cite the sources as well. So on the sources here, I've had to recreate a custom source. So this was not linked to this is not one you'd link like you often do in Family Search. I had to create this by hand. And I actually recorded the exact information here. So this shows who it was that baptized them here. Basically transcribed this directly off of the image, and then I can link to that. Unfortunately, I don't believe this is. Oh, I actually think some of these are available now. There it is. Well, I won't go try and find that, but I can actually link to those images if they're available through creating a custom source. So I think we're about done here. I'd really appreciate it. This is still under development. We have a lot of these, and it's a very large database, and we have a lot of information, but we could always use more. So I am always looking for people who are willing to contribute to Mormon Places. So if you have better knowledge and sources for specific places, wards that you actually have a journal that gives better information than what we have, I'm more than happy to work with you. We have a system that allows people to actually have editing access where they can contribute their own information to the database. In the future, we're planning on actually collecting information specifically on members and leaders so that you could actually get a list when you pull up a ward of the exact who the members and leaders were of that ward. We're still working on that. So if you have any information like that, I'd appreciate it. And you're welcome to email me at this address. And thank you very much for your time.
All right, and the chat box is open for questions. If you have any, we'll have Brandon answer those.
Sounds like we don't.
All right, it looks like we do have one question. And Jill asked, so much fun. I came in late. What is the main page, the main web page to link to Mormon Places? So I think she's just asking for the web address.
Yeah, here it is. It's just, it's mormonplaces.byu.edu. And if we do decide to change the name of the site, that link will probably still forward to whatever the new address is.
Perfect. I think that's all the questions we have for now. You're welcome to email Brandon. His email is plu@byu.edu, or you're welcome to email at fhl_webinars@byu.edu, and I can forward that to Brandon. I'll just open up the closing announcements. Our next webinar will be on that'll be next Thursday, and we'll be hearing from James Tanner, He is giving an update on the changes in on myheritage.com. He recently went to the Amsterdam conference, so we'll be getting the most recent information on that. And then following that Thursday, the first Thursday of October, we'll be hearing from Catherine Grant, and she'll be giving a presentation on the person page, specifically on the memories tab of the person page in Family Search. So we hope that you can join us then for those webinars. If you joined late to this webinar or you'd like to watch it again, a recording of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube page and on our website, and that'll be up next Monday. If you have any comments or questions, you can email me at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or visit our website, which is fh.lib.byu.edu. Thank you so much, and I hope that you have a wonderful weekend.